This video is just going to be a quick update on some of the topics that I discussed recently. First of all, we have to talk about the Moskva cruiser. I will remind everybody that the Russian side claims that there was a fire that caused the ammunition in the ship to blow up, at least a part of the ammunition, and that this led to the ship being severely damaged. The Russian side does not specify the reason as to the fire. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian side claims that they destroyed this cruiser via anti-ship missiles. Alternative theories suggested that this ship may have been heavily damaged by some sort of critical systems failure, especially as it was firing its weapons, or that it may have stumbled upon a naval mine, which is somewhat possible given the fact that various naval mines are currently drifting about the Black Sea. And here I have to say that we have received some evidence that this may indeed have been an anti-ship missile. And this is that yesterday, the Vizar factory, which produces anti-ship missiles and is located in the city of Kiev, was bombed by Russian missiles, along with numerous other targets. And the fact that this factory was bombed merely hours after we heard of the Moskva's sinking might be a coincidence, but if so, it is a very strange coincidence. Another strange piece of information that we've received is that at the time at which this ship was sunk, it was only about 60 or 70 kilometers from the Ukrainian coast, and this begs the question, what was it doing there? This range is very close, not just for some kind of anti-ship missile, but to give everybody an idea as to how close this is. Ukraine has Soviet-era rocket artillery, which can fire at a farther range. Anyways, we already have two mysteries here. The first being, what was the ship doing so close to the Ukrainian coast? And the second being, what caused the ship to catch fire. But after word of the Moskva being damaged was put out there, we received word from both the US Pentagon and from the Russian Ministry of Defense that this ship was still afloat. And here is where I should point out something that I mentioned in my previous video, which turned out to not be factually correct. I mentioned that the ship was heading back to its home port on its own power. This was apparently a claim that was made by the US Pentagon. The Russian Ministry of Defense, however, made no such claim, and we know now that the ship was at that time being towed. Anyways, several hours after this report was made, we heard that the ship had been sunk and that this was allegedly due to stormy weather. However, some people on the internet have pointed out that the Black Sea was not particularly stormy at this time. And I have to say that the fact that this ship was sunk only hours after being reached by a rescue ship sounds like the ship was scuttled on purpose. And I think that this is the case because, as one would imagine, a few hours is exactly how much time it takes for some special operations team to board the ship, retrieve any sensitive equipment, any computers, data storage devices, plant the necessary charges, and then simply blow the ship up. Although I should emphasize that most of this is just speculation on my part, since we do not have a lot of solid evidence to go off of. It makes some logical sense that a ship which is 40 years old and has already been damaged might simply be scuttled instead of spending the time and effort required to repair, restore, and then modernize that ship, especially since the replacement for this cruiser is already being built, and the fact that a cruiser of this size takes up an enormous amount of space at port, which Russia does not currently have a lot of in Sevastopol to begin with. So I can see why the Russians would simply scuttle this ship instead of bothering to repair it, but this begs the question, why didn't they publicly announce that they were scuttling it? Anyways, long story short, the Moskva missile cruiser is no more, and there are a lot of mysteries as to how and why it was destroyed. Moving on to the next subject, which is the battle for Mariupol and the siege of the Azovstal factory. First, a quick update on the battle for Mariupol. Ukrainian resistance is collapsing rapidly. Up until now, there were 3 separate pockets of resistance: the Azovstal factory, the Ilyich factory, which is located to the north, and the city port. Of these three, only one currently remains. It was announced today that Ilyich factory had been completely cleaned out. Resistance in the Mariupol port is virtually non-existent, although it perhaps has not been completely cleared out yet. I expect that by tomorrow or the day after, any remaining resistance in that area will be cleared out as well. And there was another attempt by forces trapped in one of these pockets to reach the other pocket, which is at Azovstal. This attempt was largely unsuccessful. We are being told that the vast majority of the fighting force that attempted to leave its pocket of encirclement was destroyed. And apparently, hundreds more Ukrainian soldiers and fighters have been captured. And in one of my previous videos, I talked about heavy firepower, heavy artillery, and strategic bombers being prepared to be brought down upon the garrison at Azovstal. A small reminder, since the fighting is no longer taking place in residential areas, Russia can afford to use a lot more firepower than it did before. And in my previous video, I specifically mentioned the 2S4 Tulpan, which is the world's heaviest self-propelled artillery gun, although it is, if anything, more like a super heavy mortar. This mortar fires shells which have a caliber of 240 millimeters and weigh about 130 kilograms each. The warheads within these shells are like 80 kilograms each, so these are basically miniature aviation bombs. And they can be fired pretty much non-stop at a very impressive rate of fire, several shells per minute. And of course, unlike what is the case with aviation, this mortar can stay in its position 24/7, and as soon as a target is detected, as soon as its coordinates are relayed to the operating crew, this mortar can fire, and the shell that this gun fires will then hit its target within about a minute. So the whole process from the target's detection to its destruction by an enormous mortar shell only takes about 2 or 3 minutes. But the even heavier weaponry that some people suspected would be used against the garrison at Azovstal is the Fab 3000 aviation bomb, which is to say 3-ton aviation bombs. These are carried by Russia's strategic bombers. In this case, we are talking about the Tu-22M3. And we received news from the Russian Ministry of Defense only a few hours ago that these strategic bombers were being employed to bomb the garrison at Azovstal. However, no official source has said that Fab 3000 bombs were used. But unofficial sources, which is to say sources that are on the ground in the city of Mariupol, have said that these are very likely the Fab 3000 bombs that we were hearing about. Keep in mind that this factory is absolutely massive, and I mean gargantuan in size, which is why the fireballs that you're seeing on the screen appear to be so tiny. It is because the area that is being filmed is simply gargantuan. And finally, the last topic which I am going to discuss is the cruise missile bombardment that was unleashed upon Ukraine yesterday. The Russian Ministry of Defense has already come out with a statement saying that this was in direct retaliation to Ukrainian attacks against Russian civilians on Russian territory. I will remind everybody that exactly one day after the Russian Ministry of Defense warned Ukraine to not launch any attacks into Russian territory and to not shell or bomb Russian territory, and said that if Ukraine did this, then Russia would escalate their own missile strikes on Ukrainian territory. Well, Ukraine did exactly that one day after the Russian Ministry of Defense made the statement warning Ukraine not to do so. At least 3 residential areas, small villages in Russia that are near the Ukrainian border, were bombed by Ukraine. One of them was bombed by a mortar. One of them was attacked by helicopters. And on the same day, Russia had retaliated by firing a barrage of cruise missiles, of which one cruise missile took out the aforementioned Vizar anti-ship missile factory. Air bombardment warnings were sounded over every single oblast in Ukraine. which suggests that every single region in Ukraine was targeted. We know that 8 cruise missiles struck various targets in the city of Kiev. At least 1 cruise missile struck an oil processing factory in Ivano-Frankovsk, that is western Ukraine, and I believe it is the same factory that had previously been struck and presumably repaired. Numerous targets in the city of Kharkov were struck, and according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, many of these were formations of soldiers, including some foreign mercenaries. It is reported that 30 Polish mercenaries had been killed, and I'm not going to comment whether or not this claim is true, since I have no way of knowing. But what is fairly evident is that Russia still has plenty of long-range cruise missiles which it can use to strike any target anywhere on Ukrainian territory. Russia's stockpile of these missiles is nowhere near running out, since Russia is using them for naval exercises, even as Russia is fighting a war right off of its border. And the fact that several dozen cruise missiles were used just the previous day is very telling in and of itself. Ukrainian media claimed that these missiles would run out by about the middle of March, so 1 month ago. Clearly, that hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. And on top of this, the Russian Ministry of Defense has stated that it would continue to intensify these missile attacks as a response to Ukraine's attacks on Russian territory. And I have to say that I was a bit puzzled by this statement, since it wasn't perfectly clear if it was meant that if Ukraine would continue to attack targets within Russia, Russia would respond by intensifying these missile attacks, or if we are already at the point where the kid gloves have come off and Russia is going to intensify these attacks no matter what. And this is where I will again remind everybody that there are many targets within Ukraine of actual military value that Russia has up until now refrained from striking, and this includes power plants, of which, by the way, one was apparently targeted in Kiev yesterday, but only just one. It also includes railroads, bridges, train stations, mobile towers, and perhaps most notably, administrative buildings of the Ukrainian government, which Russia has also threatened to strike in the event that Ukraine launches any kinds of attacks against Russian territory, but something that the Russian military has also, up until now, refrained from doing. So Russia has already made the threat that it would intensify its bombing attacks in the event that Ukraine does exactly what it did, and now we just have to wait and see how far Russia chooses to escalate these attacks. As I explained in my previous video, where I talked about Russia's high-powered aviation vacuum bomb, that is the father of all bombs, Russia can escalate this bombing very far. At least it has every physical ability to do so. Up until now, it's acted in a very restrained manner, but these restraints are slowly coming off. So as to what happens next and how far Russia is going to take this bombing retaliation, we are going to have to wait and see. That is all that I wanted to discuss for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like. It helps the algorithm, especially on YouTube. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please be sure to check out my Rumble channel, the link to which is in the video description. And vice versa, if you're watching this on Rumble, make sure to check out my YouTube channel, the link to which is also in the video description. And there will also be the link to my Telegram channel. Please be sure to check that out as well.